Picture this scenario. You're sitting at a dinner party, or maybe it's a community fundraiser, or just a backyard barbecue with your neighborhood friends.
Right.
And the person sitting across the table from you is your partner. And to everyone else in this room, this person is a literal saint.
Oh, yeah. The absolute best.
Right. They are charming. They are endlessly generous. They're the one leading the charity drives, the one everyone goes to for advice when their own lives fall apart. And you are sitting there just sipping your drink, watching people look at them with this absolute unadulterated adoration.
Mm-hmm.
But under the table, your stomach is tied in a physical knot. Your jaw is clenched. Your breathing is really shallow because you know a secret that nobody else in this room knows.
It's a terrifying position to be in.
It is.
Yeah.
Because you know that the moment the front door closes behind you tonight, that smiling, generous, endlessly patient person is going to just vanish.
Yeah. It's like a switch flips in the dark. Yeah.
Exactly. A complete metamorphosis. They will be replaced by someone who is cold, relentlessly critical, and deeply punitively neglectful.
Right.
You are living your life walking on a tightrope around a person the rest of the world thinks is just perfect.
Mm.
And the weight of trying to meet their invisible, ever-shifting standards of perfection is literally paralyzing you. You feel like you're losing your mind.
You really do. And it is a profoundly isolating reality. In clinical terms, we look at this as the absolute definition of cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance.
Right. Because you are being forced to hold two completely opposing realities in your brain at the exact same time. You have the world's reality, which is that your partner is flawless, and then your private reality, which is that you're being systematically dismantled.
Wow. Systematically dismantled. That's a heavy way to put it, but it's so accurate.
It is. And I think it's crucial to say it right out of the gate here. What you're experiencing in that scenario is not just a difficult relationship. And it is certainly not a moral failing on your part. You are trapped in the gravitational pull of a highly complex, highly destructive psychological architecture. And today, we really have to move way beyond the pop culture stereotypes.
Yes.
The loud, bragging, selfie-obsessed caricature of a narcissist. We're going deep into the intersection between covert narcissism, emotional manipulation, and toxic perfectionism.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because our mission for this deep dive is to completely rip the mask off this hidden machinery of human behavior.
Exactly.
Because when we say narcissism, most people immediately picture a reality TV star or, I don't know, that one guy at the gym who kisses his own biceps in the mirror.
Right, the cartoon version.
Exactly. But the sources we've pulled together for this, and we are looking at a stack of research spanning over 50 years of clinical psychology, trauma research, and behavioral science. I mean, they tell a much darker, much more invisible story.
You really do.
We are talking about data that reveals truths so precise, so unnervingly accurate, that they're going to make you stop in your tracks and say, that explains exactly what happened to me.
Which is the goal. We want to dismantle the illusion. And the foundational brick of that illusion is a word we throw around entirely too casually, I think. And that word is perfectionism.
Right. Because perfectionism sounds like a good thing.
It does.
We put it on our resumes. Oh, my biggest weakness. I'm just too much of a perfectionist. It's like the ultimate humble brag.
It really is.
We culturally associate it with high achievers, with people who have clean desks and color-coded spreadsheets and, successful startups. So where do we even begin to tear down the idea that perfectionism is a positive trait?
Well, we begin by splitting the atom of perfectionism. Because clinical psychology recognizes two entirely distinct types of perfectionism, and they operate on completely different unconscious mechanisms.
Okay.
On one side, we have what is known as neurotic perfectionism, and on the other side, we have narcissistic perfectionism.
Neurotic and narcissistic.
Right. And they might look identical from the outside. I mean, both result in a perfectly organized desk, right?
Yeah.
But the internal machinery driving them couldn't be more different.
Okay, break that down for me.
So, neurotic perfectionism is an internal struggle. It is the quiet, often agonizing endeavor of holding yourself to an impossibly high standard.
Yourself?
Yes, yourself. But narcissistic perfectionism is externalized. It is the relentless, uncompromising demand that others must be flawless.
Wow.
And when you mix the psychological cocktail of narcissism with that externalized perfectionism, you get something highly corrosive to human connection.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. So the neurotic perfectionist is Let's say the person's staying at the office until 2 a.m. because they feel like their own presentation isn't good enough and they're torturing themselves over a font choice.
Exactly.
But the narcissistic perfectionist is the boss who goes home at 5 p.m. but demands you stay until 2 a.m. And if you use the wrong font, they don't just think you made a typo, they think you are fundamentally flawed and deeply disrespectful to them.
That is a perfect distinction. Yes. And to understand the why behind this, we have to dig into the psychoanalytic roots.
Okay.
Sigmund Freud and later the incredible psychoanalyst Karen Horney mapped this out in ways that still hold up today. Horney talked about this concept called the tyranny of the should.
The tyranny of the should. I love that phrasing.
It's brilliant, isn't it? For a neurotic perfectionist, the drive for flawlessness is fueled almost entirely by guilt. They have this harsh, internalized superego.
Like a critical inner voice.
Exactly. In plain terms, they have a booming voice in their head constantly telling them they aren't good enough. They're terrified of doing a bad thing, of making a moral transgression, of letting people down.
They're carrying the weight of the world on their own shoulders.
They are. But the narcissistic perfectionist isn't driven by guilt.
No.
Not at all. They are driven by a desperate life-or-death defense against shame, humiliation, and the threat of self-annihilation.
Hang on. Self-annihilation. That sounds like a sci-fi concept.
It does sound extreme.
We are talking about someone using the wrong font on a PowerPoint, or maybe buying the wrong brand of peanut butter at the grocery store. How does a minor mistake equate to self-annihilation in someone's brain?
Because to the narcissist, a failure or even a perceived flaw in their environment is not a mistake to be corrected. It is a direct, violent attack on the cohesion of their core identity.
Wow.
You have to remember what is actually under the hood of a narcissist. Beneath the grandiosity, beneath the demands, there is a profound, echoing emptiness.
Right.
Early in life, which we'll get into later, they constructed an ideal ego, a false self. And this false self was built to survive what Horney called basic anxiety in a world they perceived as deeply hostile or neglectful.
Okay, so they build this armor.
Exactly. And if that false self is proven imperfect, if they make a mistake, or if someone associated with them makes a mistake, the mask slips. And beneath that mask is a deep-seated sense of absolute worthlessness.
So any crack in the armor is fatal.
Fatal. So to avoid the disintegrative anxiety of feeling like a worthless nobody, they demand that the external world and everyone in it serve as a flawless mirror reflecting their grandiosity back to them.
I want to try an analogy here because I think I'm grasping the emotional weight of this. Tell me if this tracks.
Okay, let's hear it.
Is neurotic perfectionism like being terrified of getting a speeding ticket? Like, oh no, I broke a rule, I have to pay a fine, I feel so guilty, I'm a bad citizen.
Yes.
Whereas narcissistic perfectionism is like being terrified that if you drop below 60 miles per hour, your car and your physical body will instantly cease to exist in time and space.
That is exceptionally accurate, yes.
Wow.
For the neurotic, the fear is punishment for breaking a rule. You survive the punishment even if it hurts. For the narcissist, the fear is that slowing down or being less than perfect proves they do not exist in any meaningful way.
That is so heavy.
It triggers an overwhelming, bottomless shame. It is a literal psychological obliteration.
Which explains the absolute disproportionate rage. I mean, if someone feels like you are literally erasing their existence by buying crunchy peanut butter instead of creamy, of course they're going to react like it's a life or death battle.
Exactly. And that is where the impact on victims becomes so severe. Because the narcissistic perfectionist externalizes this need for survival-level flawlessness, they become incredibly toxic to be around.
Right.
As Dr. Simon Sherry noted in some of the longitudinal research we reviewed, they have this rigid need for others to satisfy completely unreasonable expectations. And because human beings are flawed, people inevitably fail to be perfect.
Because we're human.
Right. And when that happens, the narcissist doesn't just express disappointment, they erupt. They use passive-aggressive hostility, silent treatments that last for days, or absolute scorching rage.
Which creates this tragic paradox. Because we looked at a recent meta-analysis by Smith and colleagues, and it shows that this quest for flawlessness literally drives away the very people they rely on for validation. They demand perfection to feel loved and safe, but the demand itself makes them chronically, deeply lonely.
It is a self-fulfilling prophecy of abandonment. They push everyone away, and then they use that abandonment as further proof that everyone else is deeply flawed and incapable of meeting their standards.
But here is where the research takes a really fascinating turn for me. Because we are using the term narcissist as a monolith, Like they're all the same, but they don't all look the same.
No, they don't.
The way they extract this perfection, the way they manipulate their environment, it takes on wildly different shape.
It does, and this is where the pop culture definition completely fails us. Currently, the clinical literature identifies over 50 distinct labels describing the variability of pathological narcissism.
Wait, 50?
50.
That is absurd. No wonder people are so confused about whether they're dealing with one. I mean, if there are 50 flavors of this thing, how do we even begin to categorize it?
It is a staggering amount of variability.
Yeah.
But for clinical utility, we can deconstruct this massive spectrum into 4 primary subtypes. And if we understand these 4 masks, we can start to see the underlying machinery. The 4 subtypes are grandiose, vulnerable, malignant, and communal.
Okay, let's walk through these. I feel like this is where the puzzle pieces are really going to snap together for someone listening. Let's start with grandiose, because that is the classic one. That's the DSM-5-TR profile we all know.
Yes, the grandiose or overt narcissist is the most heavily researched. Historically, this is tied to psychoanalytic terms like the Don Juan character or the phallic narcissist.
Right.
This is the archetype. They are dominant, entitled, and entirely lack empathy. They're often highly extroverted and socially charming, which is exactly what makes them so dangerous. Their exploitation of others is quite visible if you know what to look for.
So this is the unfaithful, charismatic womanizer, or the power-hungry, egotistical CEO who steals his employees' ideas and presents them to the board as his own, without a second thought.
Precisely. They operate on a fundamental belief of superiority. They don't just think they are better than you. They demand that you recognize it, articulate it, and serve it.
Right.
They want to be feared and admired, and they are usually quite comfortable taking up all the oxygen in the room.
But then we pivot to the vulnerable narcissist. And this one is so much stealthier.
Very stealthy.
Because if I'm at a party, I can spot the grandiose guy holding court in the kitchen. But the vulnerable narcissist might be the one sitting in the corner, right?
Very likely. The vulnerable or covert narcissist lacks the shine and the outward grandiosity. On the surface, they present as introverted, unassuming, often pessimistic, and extremely fragile. They take on a perpetual woe is me victim stance. But you have to look underneath that fragility. Underneath it is a fierce, burning entitlement and a deep, rotting envy.
It's the entitlement of the victim.
Exactly. They are acutely in touch with their shame, unlike the grandiose narcissist who represses it entirely. But the vulnerable narcissist resents the world for not recognizing their hidden greatness. Their internal narrative is, I'm a misunderstood genius, and the only reason I'm not running this company is because the universe is unfairly rigged against me.
The example in the source material for this was so painfully relatable. It's the employee who never wins Employee of the Month, but also refuses to actually put in the hard work to get it.
Yes.
Instead of working harder, they spend all their time in the break room, bitterly complaining that the boss is just too blind to recognize their innate brilliance. They weaponize their incompetence and their victimhood to make everyone else feel guilty for succeeding.
It is defensive, avoidant grandiosity. They don't want to step into the arena and risk failure because failure would destroy their fragile self-esteem.
Right, because of that annihilation fear.
Exactly. So they sit in the stands criticizing the gladiators, insisting they could do it better if they only had the chance.
Okay, that's 2. Grandiose and vulnerable. The third mask takes us into much, much darker territory, the malignant narcissist. And the literature on this, wow, Erich Fromm, the legendary psychoanalyst, famously described malignant narcissism as the quintessence of evil.
The quintessence of evil. It is a chilling phrase to find in peer-reviewed clinical literature.
It really is.
Psychoanalysts are usually very measured, very objective. For Fromm, to use the word evil tells you everything you need to know about the destructive capacity of this subtype.
It really does. But let me push back a little here, because as someone who loves behavioral science, the word evil feels slightly unscientific.
Sure.
It feels a bit like a medieval judgment rather than a clinical diagnosis.
Right.
How do we balance empathy for a psychological condition with labeling someone as the quintessence of evil?
That is a phenomenal question, and it is the exact debate that has raged in psychology for decades. To resolve that, we look to Otto Kernberg. Kernberg took Fromm's philosophical concept of evil and grounded it in strict clinical criteria. He defined 4 specific, terrifying traits that must be present for a malignant diagnosis.
What are they?
First, there is the narcissistic core, the grandiosity, the entitlement, the lack of empathy. Second, there are antisocial behaviors, lying, stealing, manipulating rules, a complete disregard for the law.
So it's like a narcissist mixed with a psychopath.
Essentially, yes. But it's the third criterion that really defines the malignancy, and that's egocentric sadism.
Stop right there. Let's
Yeah.
break that down, because egocentric sadism is a mouthful of jargon, but the reality of what it means is horrifying.
It is. Egocentric means that a behavior or a feeling is in harmony with a person's internal values. They don't feel guilty about it. It doesn't cause them distress.
Okay.
Ego dystonic would be if I snapped at you and instantly felt terrible because it violates my belief that I am a kind person.
Right. So egocentric means they are totally cool with what they're doing. It aligns with their worldview. And sadism is, well, the desire to inflict harm.
Yes. Sadism is deriving pleasure from inflicting pain, humiliation, or control over others. So egocentric sadism means this person experiences genuine internal pleasure and satisfaction in causing psychological or physical pain to others, and they believe they are entirely justified in doing so.
They like hurting you and they think you deserve it.
Precisely. And the fourth criterion locks it all into place, a paranoid orientation.
Paranoia.
Yes. They view the world as inherently hostile. They project their own unresolved hatred and aggression onto everyone else. They operate on the fundamental belief that they are constantly under threat, that everyone is out to get them, and therefore they must attack first.
That is a recipe for absolute domestic terror.
It is. In a relationship, this dynamic is a literal hostage situation. The malignant narcissist demands absolute obedience using fear, isolation, financial abuse, and sometimes physical violence. The abuse is overt.
God.
The partner lives in a state of constant adrenalized terror, knowing that any perceived misstep will trigger catastrophic retaliation.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because as terrifying as the malignant narcissist is, they are, in a way, recognizable.
Right.
If someone is overtly threatening you, if they're physically intimidating or openly sadistic, you at least know you are in danger. You can identify the predator in the room.
Yes, the threat is visible.
But the fourth mask, the communal narcissist, this is the one that completely blew my mind in the research. The term wasn't even formally coined until 2012 by researchers like Bauer and his colleagues, the saintly narcissist.
The communal narcissist is arguably the most insidious of all four subtypes because they gain their power, their narcissistic supply, through performative altruism.
Performative altruism, so weaponized charity.
Exactly. They paint themselves as the ultimate martyr, the community savior, the most selfless person in any given room. They are the beloved volunteer at the animal shelter, the charismatic spiritual leader, the tireless charity worker, the person organizing the neighborhood watch.
But the catch is, it's all a performance. The motive isn't actually to help people. The motive is to be seen helping people.
The motive is purely the extraction of admiration. They are a wolf in sheep's clothing, but they've tailored the fleece so perfectly that even they sometimes believe they are the sheep.
Oh.
While they perform extreme, grandiose empathy in public, their private lives are a completely different story. Behind closed doors, with their partners or their children, they are cold, highly critical, deeply dismissive, and profoundly neglectful.
It's that cognitive dissonance again.
Exactly. Their internal self-narrative is, I am the most caring and selfless person in the world. Therefore, my partner, who wants me to stay home and watch a movie instead of running my third charity gala this week, is a selfish, demanding monster.
This is the paradox that traps so many victims. Because think about it. If you're married to a malignant narcissist, you are isolated by terror. You are isolated because they won't let you leave the house.
Right.
But if you are married to a communal narcissist, you are isolated by the community's adoration of your abuser.
Yes. Your abuser's glowing public reputation literally becomes the bars of your cage.
Right. If you try to speak out, if you go to a friend or a therapist and say, hey, my partner's actually emotionally starving me, they bill me constantly, they never help with the kids, nobody believes you.
I think you're making it up.
The community looks at you and says, are you crazy? Your partner is a saint? They just built a well in a third world country? You are so lucky to have them. You end up looking like the demanding, ungrateful villain. You become the crazy one.
And that is the exact calculated mechanism of control. They weaponize their goodness. They induce massive amounts of guilt.
Yeah.
They will say things to their partner like, after all the sacrifices I make for this community, after all the lives I'm saving, how can you be so petty as to complain that I forgot our anniversary? They use the community's moral standards to gather ammunition against the victim.
Which means all four of these masks, the egotistical CEO, The complaining victim in the break room, the tyrannical sadist, and the saintly community leader, they look wildly different on the outside.
Completely different.
But mechanically, they are identical, aren't they?
Mechanically, they are exactly the same engine. They are all extracting supply.
Right.
The CEO extracts admiration and fear. The victim extracts pity and lowered expectations. The malignant extracts pain and submission. The communal extracts moral superiority and adoration. But every single one of them is using that external supply for the exact same unconscious purpose.
Which is?
To regulate a profoundly unstable, fragile, empty sense of self.
So we've looked deeply into the abuser's mind. We see the engine. But what is actually happening to the person on the receiving end of this?
This is where it gets really dark.
Because if you listen to mainstream advice, people just say, oh, just leave, just set boundaries. But this isn't just dealing with a bad mood or a quirky personality. This is systemic emotional destruction. Let's shift our focus to the lived physical reality of the victim.
I'm really glad you brought up the just leave advice because it highlights a fundamental misunderstanding of abuse. When you move into the lived reality of the victim, you see the true, comprehensive devastation of coercive control. Victims in these relationships don't just feel unhappy, they experience a systematic dismantling of their reality. We mentioned cognitive dissonance earlier, holding two conflicting realities in your mind at once. The world says my partner is a saint, but my reality is that I am terrified of them. This constant friction leads to severe gaslighting.
And gaslighting isn't just someone lying to you.
No.
It's someone lying to you so convincingly and so consistently that you stop trusting your own memory. You stop trusting your own senses.
Exactly. It is the erosion of the victim's executive function. The narcissist actually relies on this confusion and exhaustion. If you are constantly questioning your own sanity, you don't have the energy to fight back or plan an exit strategy.
You're just paralyzed.
You are kept perpetually off balance.
And to survive this environment, the victim develops a very specific trauma response. We always hear about fight, flight, or freeze. But the research highlights a fourth response, which is fawning.
Fawn.
Yeah, fawning is the hidden emotional survival tactic of the victim. What does fawning actually look like when you are in the trenches of one of these relationships?
Fawning is the absolute systematic suppression of your own needs, your own personality, and your own boundaries in order to pacify a perceived threat. You essentially turn yourself into a human pretzel to avoid triggering the abuser's rage or their abandonment.
So it's not just being nice, it's a biological survival mechanism.
It is entirely biological.
Yeah.
In these relationships, fawning looks like constantly apologizing for things you absolutely didn't do just to end a grueling 3-day silent treatment.
Right.
It looks like hypervigilance, anticipating moods before they even happen. You learn to read the micro expressions on their face, the exact way they close a kitchen cabinet. You adjust your behavior before they can even formulate a complaint.
Wow.
It is taking on vastly unfair financial, physical, or emotional burdens to constantly prove your dedication because the abuser has successfully framed you as the selfish one.
You essentially curate your entire existence to act as a shock absorber for their emotional instability.
Yes, a shock absorber.
You suppress your legitimate anger, your sadness, your exhaustion, because you know that expressing any of those normal human emotions will only trigger the narcissist into playing the victim. Like, how dare you be tired? Don't you know how stressed I am?
Which leads to a complete loss of self. And this agonizing erosion of reality doesn't just stay in the mind. The psychological stress eventually overflows into the physical body.
Yes, this is the part that's there.
Bessel van der Kolk famously wrote that the body keeps the score. And the clinical data we are looking at regarding the victims of narcissistic abuse is staggering. The somatic toll of this trauma bond is literal physical devastation.
Let's get into the biology of that, because this blew my mind. We aren't just talking about getting a stress headache.
No, we are talking about systemic physiological crises. The human body is designed to handle acute stress. You see a tiger, your sympathetic nervous system activates, you flood with adrenaline and cortisol, you run away, and then your parasympathetic nervous system calms you down.
The danger passes.
Right. But the body is not designed to live in a perpetual, unyielding state of hyperarousal.
Which is exactly what living with a narcissist is. The tiger is always in the living room.
Precisely. When you are constantly anticipating the next passive-aggressive remark, the next rage episode, or the next silent treatment, your nervous system never resets.
It's just always on.
Your body is chronically flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. Over time, this chronic hormonal flooding becomes incredibly destructive.
The sources detail this so specifically. Victims frequently present with severe cardiovascular issues. We are talking about chronic heart palpitations, unexplained tachycardia, and high blood pressure because their nervous system is locked in overdrive. And the gastrointestinal distress is massive.
The gut-brain axis is incredibly sensitive to chronic fear. The vagus nerve, which connects the brain to the digestive tract, is constantly signaling danger.
Right, so victims develop severe IBS, acid reflux, ulcers. The cortisol actually attacks the gut lining, opening up the tight junctions and causing leaky gut, which leads to systemic inflammation.
It's a cascading effect.
And that inflammation triggers autoimmune flare-ups. People develop lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, Hashimoto's, literally triggered by the chronic stress hormones of their environment. Not to mention the intractable insomnia.
Oh, the sleep deprivation is torture.
Your brain simply refuses to power down into deep sleep because it biologically believes a predator is sleeping next to you.
When you look at the medical charts of these victims, it looks like the charts of combat veterans. It is complex PTSD manifesting in the physical tissues of the body.
And this raises a massive overarching question. If the outcome of this personality structure is so lethally destructive, if it literally degrades the cardiovascular and immune systems of the people around them, how does a human brain get wired to be a narcissist in the first place?
It's the big question.
Right. I mean, nobody is born a manipulative communal narcissist, are they? Are they born this way or are they made?
It is the ultimate nature versus nurture question, and the consensus in the deep psychoanalytic and behavioral research is that they are fundamentally made.
Made.
Yes. To understand the blueprint of a narcissist, we have to stop looking at their behavior as calculated, adult evil, and start viewing it as a severe developmental arrest.
A developmental arrest, meaning they stop growing emotionally at a certain age.
Exactly. It's a profound failure to mature psychologically. The pioneering psychoanalysts Heinz Kohut and Otto Kernberg, who we mentioned earlier, laid the groundwork for this with what is called object relations theory. They found that the trauma that creates a narcissist isn't necessarily overt physical abuse, though it certainly can be. Sometimes the most traumatizing experience for a developing human brain is the absolute pervasive absence of emotional giving from a primary caregiver.
The absence of emotional giving. So profound emotional neglect creates a psychological void, and the child has to invent this grandiosity to fill the hole just to survive.
Yes. A child needs to feel seen, mirrored, and unconditionally loved to develop a stable sense of self. If that mirroring is absent or if the love is highly conditional, the child panics.
That's heartbreaking, actually.
It is, but it is highly dependent on the specific style of parenting they endure. A comprehensive systematic review and meta-analysis we examined, which utilized Baumrein's typology of parenting styles, maps this out beautifully.
Let's break down Baumrein's typology, because this is fascinating for anyone who has kids or anyone who was once a kid, which is all of us.
Right.
Diana Baumrein categorized parenting into quadrants based on two metrics: warmth and demand.
Correct. How emotionally supportive are the parents versus how strictly do they enforce rules and expectations? The research shows that different intersections of these styles forge different masks of narcissism.
Okay, give me an example.
For instance, let's look at authoritarian parenting. This is a household with extremely high demands, rigid rules, strict discipline, but very low warmth, low responsiveness, and low emotional support.
Basically, do it because I said so and stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about.
Exactly. This style consistently correlates with the development of vulnerable narcissism. The child is constantly criticized, controlled, and emotionally neglected. They learn that they are inherently flawed.
Right.
So they withdraw into a fragile, victimized shell as a coping mechanism. But internally, they secretly harbor intense fantasies of greatness to survive the emotional coldness. They develop a resentful, avoidant grandiosity.
That makes total sense. They are crushed, so they build a fantasy world where they are the unrecognized king. But what about the grandiose narcissist, the entitled, overt CEO type? They clearly weren't crushed into a corner.
No, they emerge from a very different but equally destructive parenting failure. And that's lenient, permissive parenting, combined with extreme parental overvaluation. This is sometimes called the apple of daddy's eye effect.
Oh, this is the parent who thinks their child is the literal second coming.
Wow.
The parent who storms into the school to yell at the math teacher because their precious genius got a B minus, and obviously the teacher's incompetent.
That is exactly it. When parents excessively pamper a child, fail to set any realistic boundaries, and constantly tell the child they are inherently superior to everyone else, they rob that child of a crucial developmental milestone.
They rob them of the ability to fail.
Yes, they remove all friction from the child's life. The child never learns how to handle disappointment. They never learn that they are just one human among many.
Wow.
They never develop resilience or authentic self-esteem, which is built by overcoming challenges. Instead, their grandiosity is artificially inflated by the parents. They grow up feeling intensely, inherently entitled, but their self-esteem is actually incredibly fragile because it hasn't been tested.
So they become adults who rely entirely on external validation to maintain that false superiority, and they will destroy anyone who threatens it.
Absolutely.
That is terrifying. We are literally loving kids into pathology by refusing to let them experience normal human friction.
We are.
But it's not just a behavioral habit, is it? There's actual neurobiology at play here. The research mentions cognitive flaws and early brain development in these neglected or overvalued kids.
This is where the psychology meets the hardware of the brain. Early trauma, profound neglect, or even extreme overvaluation can lead to a literal withdrawal from reality.
Meaning what exactly?
The sources describe dual flaws in the way the brain develops spatial and language processing. Abused or severely neglected children may suffer from infant amnesia, an impaired ability to form cohesive memories, and, more importantly, an impaired ability to engage in reality testing.
Reality testing meaning the ability to look at a situation, look at the facts, and update your beliefs based on new evidence.
Precisely. Because the external world during their formative years was either too painful, in the case of neglect, or too unconditionally enabling. In the case of overvaluation, the child's brain retreats into what clinicians call psychotic grandiosity and magical thinking.
Wait, psychotic grandiosity, that is a very heavy word. Does that mean they literally lose touch with reality? Are they hallucinating their greatness?
To a significant non-clinical degree, yes. They lose touch with shared reality. The narcissist literally fails to differentiate between their internal fantasy of perfection and the external objective reality.
Right.
This is why when you argue with a narcissist and you present them with undeniable objective facts, text messages, bank statements, recordings, you are hitting a brick wall.
Yes. Because in their brain, if their internal fantasy dictates that they are a perfect, flawless victim, the external facts must be wrong.
They don't just lie, they rewrite history in real time.
They confabulate.
Exactly. Their brain actively alters their memory of the event to protect the fragile, idealized self-image. To admit they were wrong could shatter the false self, letting in that annihilating shame we talked about earlier. So their brain literally protects them by altering reality.
So what does this all mean? If I'm synthesizing this correctly, if we zoom all the way out, a narcissist is essentially a profoundly traumatized, developmentally arrested toddler operating a grown adult's body.
Yes.
And they are piloting this massive, armored, false, idealized self-image like a mech suit, just to survive a world they perceive as deeply hostile.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. It is a tragedy, a profound systemic tragedy of human development. But, and this is the most critical point, it is a tragedy that makes them incredibly lethally dangerous to healthy adults who try to relate to them as equals.
Right. Because when that toddler's absolute survival-level need for perfection and control meets the real, messy adult world, the results can be catastrophic.
Which brings us to the darkest, most lethal edge of this entire psychological architecture.
The perfectionism suicide link.
Oh!
This part of the research completely stopped me cold. Because up until now, we've talked about how narcissism destroys the victims, it ruins the health of their spouses and children.
Right.
But the data shows it frequently destroys the narcissist as well, in the most final, devastating way possible.
The research on this is incredibly robust, spanning over 50 years of clinical observation and empirical data. Narcissistic perfectionists are locked in an endless loop of self-defeating overstriving.
Okay.
They have constructed this ideal ego, this flawless mech suit you described, but no human being can achieve absolute perfection. Reality always eventually intervenes.
Right, you age, you lose a job, a business fails.
Exactly. And when the gap between their grandiose expectation of themselves and their actual flawed reality becomes too wide, it triggers a catastrophic psychological crisis.
The numbers in the meta-analysis by Smith and colleagues are sobering. They cite the Alaska Suicide Followback Study. In this study, researchers interviewed the family and friends of decedents' people who had completed suicide. They found that 56% of the decedents were described as perfectionistic by their loved ones.
Over half.
Over half. And it is not just adults. The tragedy extends to youth. A study by Turnblom and colleagues looking at adolescent suicide found that 68.1% of parents noted their child's high demands and expectations as a primary contributing factor to their death.
68%. That is heartbreaking. And this reveals a deeply chilling paradox in our culture. We touched on this at the beginning. Society universally praises perfectionistic strivings.
We do.
We reward people who set ruthlessly high standards. We call them high achievers, visionaries, rock stars. We view this trait as healthy and adaptive. But this comprehensive meta-analysis explicitly draws into question the notion that these strivings are ever healthy. The data displays consistent positive associations between perfectionistic strivings and suicide ideation and attempts. It shatters the myth of the healthy perfectionist, because the mechanism underlying it is what the legendary suicidologist Edwin Schneidman called psychache.
Psychache. What a viscerally evocative term. Profound, unbearable psychological pain.
Yes. Psychache is the engine of self-destruction. Because of their black and white dichotomous thinking, perfectionists, especially narcissistic ones, do not possess the cognitive flexibility to view a single failure as a learning opportunity, or even just a minor setback.
To a healthy mind, failure is an event. You fail a test, you are sad, you study harder.
Right. But to the narcissistic perfectionist, failure is an identity. A single failure is a total, irredeemable catastrophe that completely exposes their underlying worthlessness. And in their rigid, fragile mindset, that total failure is seen as a shame so unbearable that it warrants death.
It is terrifying when you pull back and look at the macro level. Our society, culturally, economically, and socially, rewards the exact traits: relentless perfectionism, grandiosity, a complete lack of empathy in business, the obsession with outward appearances that are clinically proven to destroy the individual from the inside out.
And leave a trail of traumatized, physically ill victims in their wake.
Exactly. We give these people corner offices, we give them community awards, we elect them to public office.
We do. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this deeply ingrained discrepancy between expectation and reality explains why narcissists are so prone to sudden, seemingly inexplicable collapses.
You see a highly successful person, seemingly on top of the world, and suddenly they implode.
Yes. The relentless, exhausting pressure to maintain the false self creates a mental environment that is ripe for severe obsessive-compulsive symptoms, crippling anxiety, and ultimately self-destruction. The narcissist's vanity, the selfies, the bragging, the demand for the perfect dinner party is not simply a love of self. It is a desperate, exhausting defense mechanism against a bottomless well of self-loathing.
Wow. Okay, let's synthesize this massive journey we've just taken. We started at that dinner party feeling the physical tension of the illusion. We looked at the clinical origins, the neglect, the overvaluation, and finally we arrived at the lethal, tragic consequences.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. Narcissism and perfectionism are not just about vanity. They aren't about someone taking too many selfies or being annoyed that a picture is crooked on the wall. They are profound, tragic, and highly destructive psychological defenses against unbearable shame, vulnerability, and early childhood trauma.
Exactly. And the most crucial takeaway from all of this data is understanding the mechanics of that destruction. Whether it is the malignant narcissist overtly physically terrorizing a partner, or the communal narcissist slowly starving their spouse of affection while being worshipped by the neighborhood, the core engine is identical.
Right.
It is the relentless extraction of supply to sustain a false self, operating at the complete and total expense of the victim's reality, sanity, and physical health.
And if you are listening to this right now, and you are realizing that you have been living in the orbit of one of these personalities, if you are experiencing the chronic exhaustion, the unexplainable somatic illnesses, the IBS, the insomnia, the autoimmune flare-ups, if you are drowning in the absolute cognitive dissonance of feeling like you are going crazy while everyone else thinks your partner or your boss or your parent is a literal saint, I want to validate you right now.
You are not crazy.
You are not crazy. This pattern is real. It is documented across 50 years of clinical research. It is a studied, predictable, biological pathology. And recognizing the psychological machinery that is being used against you is the very first and most important step to breaking that trauma bond.
Knowledge is the most powerful tool for dismantling coercive control. The The fog of confusion is their greatest weapon. Once you see the hidden architecture, the deep shame driving the grandiosity, the childhood trauma driving the perfectionism, you can finally stop internalizing their demands.
You can stop twisting yourself into knots trying to be perfect for a person whose demands actually have absolutely nothing to do with your behavior and everything to do with their own frantic psychological survival.
Exactly.
Which leaves us with one final lingering thought to explore on your own. We know, based on all this evidence, that communal and grandiose narcissists thrive on external validation. They feed on the appearance of moral superiority, power, and perfection. So look around at our modern world today. Look at social media, which is essentially a billion-dollar engine engineered for virtue signaling, curation, and public validation. Look at our corporate leadership structures that actively reward ruthlessness and penalize empathy. How much of our modern culture is actually designed by and built for the ultimate predators in sheep's clothing? Are we inadvertently building a society that mass produces the exact pathology we are so desperately trying to heal?